Well, good morning, all. Thank you for being here today. Now, before I begin, I know that at the forefront of all of our minds continues to be the terrible events that unfolded in Brussels earlier this week. And let me just take a moment to reiterate that the entire Obama administration and the American people continue to stand with the people of Belgium, with the people of all of Europe and the world in condemning these appalling attacks and in offering our support, condolences in any way that we can. Our thoughts and prayers are with the victims and their loved ones, both those who perished, those who suffered, all who are touched by this. And the Department of Justice is in constant communication with our counterparts in Belgium. We are committed to providing any and all assistance as we move forward together with unity and with strength. Now, I also want to make clear that while we have received no specific credible threats to the homeland, we will continue to remain vigilant in order to ensure that we can keep the American people safe from harm. Thank you. Now, I am joined today for this announcement by FBI Director James Comey, by the U.S. Attorney for the Southern District of New York, Preet, Bharara, and the Assistant Attorney General for National Security, John Carlin. We're here today to announce a major law enforcement action as part of our ongoing efforts to disrupt cyber threats and to protect our national security. Today, we have unsealed an indictment against 7 alleged experienced hackers employed by computer security companies working on behalf of the Iranian government, including the Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps. A federal grand jury in Manhattan found that these 7 individuals conspired together and with others to conduct a series of cyber attacks against civilian targets in the United States financial services industry that in total, or in all, in sum, cost the victims tens of millions of dollars. Now, between late 2011 and mid-2013, the United States financial sector suffered a large-scale and coordinated campaign of distributed denial of service, or DDoS, or DDoS attacks. This is a particular kind of cyber attack in which multiple compromised sources are used to target and overwhelm a single system. And through these attacks, the servers of 46 financial institutions were flooded with traffic over the course of 176 days. As a result of this DDoS attack, online services were disrupted, hundreds of thousands of Americans were unable to access bank accounts online. These attacks were relentless, they were systematic, and they were widespread. They threatened our economic well-being and our ability to compete fairly in the global marketplace, both of which are directly linked to our national security. And we believe that they were conducted with the sole purpose of undermining the targeted companies and damaging the online operation of America's free markets. In addition to the actions that we have detailed, one of the defendants is also charged with illegally obtaining access to the supervisory control and data acquisition system of the Bowman Dam in Rye, New York. At the time of this alleged intrusion, the dam was undergoing maintenance and actually had been disconnected from the system. But for that fact, that access would have given this defendant the ability to control water levels, to control flow rates, an outcome that clearly could have posed a clear and present danger to the public health and safety of Americans. And I'd also like to thank the Department of Homeland Security as well as the City of Rye, New York, for their assistance in managing that particular incident. In unsealing this indictment, the Department of Justice is sending a powerful message that we will not allow any individual, group, or nation to sabotage American financial institutions or undermine the integrity of fair competition in the operation of the free market. Through the work of our National Security Division, the FBI, and U.S. Attorneys' offices around the country, we will continue to pursue national security cyber threats through the use of all available tools, including public criminal charges. And as today's unsealing makes clear, individuals who engage in computer hacking will be exposed for their criminal conduct and sought for apprehension and prosecution in an American court of law. This case is a reminder of the seriousness of cyber threats to our national security, and these public criminal charges represent a groundbreaking step forward in addressing that threat. We will continue to use every tool at our disposal to investigate the malicious cyber actors so that we can attribute their actions down to the country, the government agency, the organization, and the individuals involved and charge them publicly. Now, I'd like to thank all of those who worked so diligently to bring the investigation to this point, including particularly the targeted private companies and others in the private sector who were integral partners throughout this investigation. This case highlights the significance of what we can accomplish by working together, holding bad actors accountable and protecting the American people. And at this time, let me introduce the Director of the FBI, James Comey, who will give us additional details on today's announcement. Mr. Director?
Thank you, Attorney General Lynch. Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. The challenge we face in investigating cybercrime is that cyber criminals often think that it's a freebie to reach into the United States, to do harm, to steal what matters to us, to wreak havoc. They think it's a freebie because they're halfway around the world and trying to use anonymization techniques. The message of this case is that we will work together to shrink the world and impose costs on those people so that no matter where they are, we will try to reach them. And no matter how hard they work to hide their identity and their tradecraft, we will find ways to pierce that shield and identify them. That's the message of this case. That's why it's so important that we bring this case. I want to say a word of thanks to the men and women of the FBI who worked very hard on this for a number of years across the country. What's also interesting about this case is that we did it virtually. We used the New York field office, Cincinnati, Chicago, San Francisco, and Phoenix, all working together. We found a reasonably good U.S. Attorney's Office to work with, and together those offices contributed to a single effort in the Southern District of New York to bring charges and impose costs on people who thought before this that it was a freebie. So my thanks to the U.S. Attorney's Office, my thanks to the National Security Division here at Justice, but especially to the good folks of the FBI for staying after this. People often ask us, well, these people are in Iran, so how are you ever going to get them? The world is small and our memories are long. We never say never. People often like to travel for vacation or education, and we want them looking over their shoulder, both when they travel and when they sit at a keyboard. That's the message of this case. There is no place safe on this increasingly small world. So with that, I'd like to introduce the U.S. Attorney for the Southern District of New York, Preet Bharara.
Thank you, Director Comey, for introducing me, and from whom I inherited a reasonably good U.S. Attorney's Office some years ago. So the charges announced today respond directly to a coordinated cyber assault on New York, its institutions, and its infrastructure. As has been said, 7 Iranians charged with engaging in a campaign to disrupt and disable dozens of financial institutions at the heart of the U.S. financial system, many based in New York City. And obviously also you've heard about the infiltration of the Bowman Dam. As you have also heard, these were not just ordinary crimes, but calculated attacks directed by groups with ties to Iran's Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps and designed with the specific goal of harming America. The Iranian defendants intended New York to be the epicenter of harm, because New York is the financial capital of the world, because New York has always been the blue chip target for those who want to harm our country. As I said, and as the Attorney General said, basically what occurred here was a group of individuals, 7 charged in the indictment, 3 who were members of a particular security company called ITSecTeam, and 4 others who were associated with a security firm called Mersad Company, each and together within their respective companies engaged in what are known as DDoS attacks, basically by putting malware on computers all around the world, seizing control of them remotely, and creating what's called a botnet, and then launching attacks basically on at least 46 institutions, financial institutions around the country, which caused, as the Attorney General mentioned, tens of millions of dollars of damage and harm to those companies. Separately, you also heard about the infiltration of the Bowman Dam, which I think to our mind represents a frightening new frontier for cybercrime. And although no actual harm resulted from that infiltration, the potential havoc that such a hack of American infrastructure could wreak is scary to think about. And so at the end of the day, there's good news and there's bad news. Cybercriminals, working with an entity with ties to the government of Iran, attacked and shut down vast swaths of the U.S. financial system at times. Hackers infiltrated infrastructure, as alleged, taking over computers that control the water levels at a dam near New York City. So those sound like plot lines of a movie, but they're not. They're real crimes committed by real people in the real world. So that's the bad news. The good news is that the Department of Justice and the FBI and other law enforcement agencies are on it. and they're working hard every day. And as this announcement today shows, we will investigate any perpetrators who seek to harm the United States of America. We will indict them, we will expose them, and then we will do everything in our power to apprehend and ultimately prosecute them in a court of law. We now live in a world where a devastating attack on our financial system, our infrastructure, and our way of life can be launched from anywhere in the world, just with a simple click of a mouse. Whether such an attack is motivated by greed or directed by an arm of a nation state, it must and will be met with a strong law enforcement response. But beyond law enforcement, what we can and will do, these cyber attacks should serve as a wake-up call for everyone responsible for the security of our financial markets, and a wake-up call for everyone entrusted with guarding our infrastructure. Our future security depends on heeding that call. Now, I want to thank some people also. I know people have been thanked, but in the same way that this is no ordinary crime, this was no ordinary investigation. Solving a global cyber intrusion case like this takes a lot of people working in a lot of different places in close collaboration with each other. First, I want to thank my friend, the Attorney General Loretta Lynch, for her support and leadership and guidance on this case and every case that she oversees. I also want to thank my friend John Carlin, the Assistant Attorney General of the National Security Division, and all the folks in his office who worked on this case and brought us to this point. And of course, the FBI, represented here by its leader, Jim Comey. The sprawling investigation here, as Director Comey already mentioned, involved a lot of different FBI offices. And I want to mention and acknowledge and thank them also. They involved the field offices in Chicago, Cincinnati, New York, Phoenix, and San Francisco. And then finally, I want to thank the fine men and women in my own office who made this case happen, especially Assistant U.S. Attorney Tim Howard, as well as his supervisors Nicole Friedlander and Paul Krieger, who lead our complex frauds and cybercrime unit. So thank you all for all your work. And now let me introduce the Assistant Attorney General of the National Security Division, John Carlin.
Thank you, Preet. And under Preet's leadership, there's no better partner in the country for the National Security Division than the Southern District of New York. And as someone who has family and friends in New York City, I'm grateful he's there and the prosecutors that work with him to defend against national security threats. And I want to thank the FBI for their work on this investigation, and most importantly, the victims, who are sometimes not treated as victims when it comes to cyber attacks. We know that the bad guys are not you. The bad guys are the people overseas targeting your systems, and that we can't confront these threats without your critical assistance. This case demonstrates the power when public and private do work together to confront a cyber threat. For many years, nation states and their affiliates enjoyed what they perceived to be as a cloak of anonymity, a cloak they hid behind to break our laws through cyber intrusions and to threaten our security and economic well-being. They had this perceived cloak of anonymity because they thought we couldn't figure out who did it, and they thought if we did figure out who did it, we wouldn't say it. Well, they're wrong. In a new approach, we have unleashed prosecutors and agents across the country against national security cyber threats. And that's why 2 years ago at this very podium, we could announce an indictment against 5 members of the People's Liberation Army. Today, let this indictment reinforce that the days of perceived anonymity are gone. We can remove the cloak, and we will. Today's announcement proves once again that there is no free pass for those who conduct nation-state affiliated intrusions. This week is a significant week when it comes to our national security cyber program. On Tuesday, we unveiled charges against members of the Syrian Electronic Army, and yesterday, a Chinese businessman in Los Angeles pled guilty for conspiring to hack into defense contractors and to steal sensitive information, including information related to fighter jets. And now, today, we can tell the world that hackers affiliated with the Iranian government attacked U.S. systems, and we seek to bring them to justice for their crimes. So no matter where a hacker is located or who he is affiliated with, be it China or North Korea, be it the Islamic State in the Levant or the Syrian Electronic Army, we can do so publicly, figure out who did it, say who did it, and have consequences. And this is still the beginning of this approach. We will continue to pursue hackers affiliated with nation states or terrorist organizations. And when we find you, we will use every tool at our disposal to hold you to account. That means more public actions. It means more charges. It means more sanctions. It means every tool that the government can bring to bear to hold national security cyber hackers accountable. So thank you, and I want to turn it over to the Attorney General for questions.
Okay, questions?
Madam Attorney General, we know the Brussels attackers were surveilling a nuclear facility. Are you concerned that ISIS may try to target similar facilities here in the U.S.? And how prepared are we for our infrastructure against physical or cyber attacks?
Well, certainly the threat to our infrastructure, as demonstrated by this attempted attack on the Bowman Dam, is of great concern to us. We're constantly working with our partners, both in the private industry and in local governments, to relay information when we learn of issues or threats, and also to make sure that they have the most recent information about other hacking activities so they can protect themselves. At this point, we think that this case speaks for itself in terms of these actors. Obviously, we remain vigilant in the future against not just dams, but all of our infrastructure. It is indeed a serious concern for us, and we think this is another example in which the public-private partnership is really key. And then,
Attorney General and also Director Comey, they often say attribution is incredibly difficult when it comes to prosecuting cyber attacks. Can you talk a little bit and give a little more detail as to how you were able to trace these actors back to Iran and the RIGC?
I can't give you specifics on that because that would go into a lot of the investigative techniques that we used. But what I can do is echo what you've heard from this podium today, which is that an important part of our cybersecurity practice is to identify the actors and to attribute them publicly when we can. We do this so that they know that they cannot hide. A large part of a successful cybersecurity attack in the perpetrator's mind is in fact getting in and getting out without anyone knowing who is involved. This cloak is being repeatedly pulled away. I will defer again to the director if he can give you further information, but we don't go into a lot of specifics on that. Did you want to add anything, Jim?
No, we want them to know that we can. We don't want them to know how we can.
Yes. I want it to you next.
Madam Attorney General, what good does it do to indict these hackers and to spend resources investigating and prosecuting them if they're not likely to be extradited? And further on that, have you seen any tangible effect from the indictment 2 years ago now into the 5 Chinese military hackers?
Well, with respect to these or any defendants whom we indict who are currently fugitives, our view is that fugitives don't remain that way forever. We have a long history of reaching out and working with countries where individuals may land and extraditing them, and we also have a long history in keeping charges alive and, in fact, bringing people to the U.S. for justice. So, again, because they're not here now does not mean that we will never get them. We do not let that be a barrier to bringing the charges, particularly where is here. It is so important to let the world know that we are aware of their actions. And your question about the 5...
Yes, that was 2 years ago, indicting Chinese military hackers, again, people abroad. Have we seen any tangible effect from that indictment?
Well, I think that obviously I think that there's a whole of government approach to this, and I think that we actually have seen some significant changes in our interactions with the Chinese government in terms of cybersecurity norms and in terms of the way in which they have come to agreement with the U.S. on the parameters of how countries should use cyber activity with each other. But as we said it before, this is the beginning, and it's a very, very important arrow in our arsenal of cybersecurity.
Madam Attorney General and then FBI Director Comey, any signs that the terrorism suspects in Brussels have any ties to people inside the United States, first? And secondly, how concerning is it that hackers overseas were rooting around in the infrastructure of something like a dam, which could, in the future have the kind of damage that we're talking about here?
Well, I think that whenever you're talking about infrastructure, be it a dam, be it a highway system, be it an electrical grid, we obviously have grave concern as to the ability to affect millions of people quickly. Certainly, it's very similar to the concern we have, however, with the attempted impact here on the financial system. As we saw, locking people out of online access to accounts is incredibly disruptive. The work required by companies to remediate that is incredibly expensive, literally tens of millions of dollars. So our concern has always been with cyber issues, and one of the reasons why cybersecurity is such a priority for this administration and for this department is because we are in a world where, with literally the stroke of a mouse or the click of a computer pad, damage can be unleashed much greater, at a much greater level than an individual could perpetrate alone. However, this is something that we're focused on and that we're actively looking to prevent. With respect to your question on Brussels, as you know, this is an investigation conducted by the Belgian authorities. We're offering all assistance, but it is their investigation. It is simply too early at this point to tell, or certainly to provide information on the extra European links of the individuals at this point. And let's see if, Jim, did you want to add anything? Okay, then I promise right behind you.
What assistance have you provided to European investigators? Or what have they asked for? What have you provided? And is there any sense that this attack was directed by ISIS, or was it more of an inspirational attack like the one that occurred in San Bernardino? Is there any sense that you guys have?
Well, again, we're at the early stages of this investigation, and we are providing assistance. The FBI has offered assistance. Certainly DOJ, through our legal attaches, have offered any assistance that could be useful, and we stand ready to provide them with that. We are at the very early stages of this, however, and it is being conducted by the Belgian authorities. We respect their investigation. Again, we're in a supporting role here, and it's just simply too early to provide that kind of information for you. So I'm sorry I can't give you more insight into that.
In terms of attribution, can you say, beyond these 7 individuals you've indicted, whether you believe that these attacks were directed by either the IRGC or the Iranian government itself? And also, in terms of the long memory and the powerful message being sent here, would you say this message is more powerful, or is the message from January when I believe clemency, pardons, and commutations were given to 7 Iranians, charges were dropped against 14 other Iranians as part of deals between the U.S. and Iran? Would you say those actions send a more powerful message, or the indictment you announced today of these fugitives?
I think if you are a computer hacker sitting overseas in whatever country you've chosen to hide in, this indictment sends the powerful message that the full force of the U.S. government will come after you should you seek to attack our infrastructure, our financial institutions, or our people. That's the strong message of today's charges.
And what about the attribution to the Iranian government?
Well, the indictment, as it sets forth, is these individuals worked for 2 separate security companies, and those companies and these individuals themselves definitely have ties, as alleged, to the IRGC. Beyond that, I'm not going to comment on facts that may come out at trial or any other facts that aren't set forth in the pleadings.
While I understand the investigation goes on in Brussels, the facts of the attack are well known. Has it caused you, the FBI, to rethink American security based on the facilities that were attacked there? Does this give you any second thoughts about how American security should be changed?
You know, we are always looking at American security, both in the absence of an attack and certainly following something like what occurred in Brussels or in Paris several months earlier. We're always looking at whether or not it presages any vulnerabilities in the American system, and we're always looking to make sure that we shore them up as best we can.
What have you concluded?
Well, certainly at this point, as I indicated before, we do not have a specific credible threat against the homeland, but that does not mean that we are not being vigilant in terms of reviewing cases that are already open or investigations that are already open and looking at these issues to see, again, how it could affect the U.S. As we've said before, this is the cancer that is ISIL is a growing threat that is currently looking at Europe. They seem to be focused on Europe, France, Belgium, and the like, but certainly we've seen individuals here who have chosen to become inspired by that type of terrorist thinking and have chosen to act on their own. That is also a concern of ours, and so we remain vigilant in that regard as well. As you know, we also have a very active program in prosecuting those individuals who seek to travel overseas to join the Islamic State. We have prosecuted approximately 80 individuals to date, and we continue those vigorous investigations and prosecutions. When you come back.
Yes, thank you. General Lynch and FBI Director Comey, there's been a lot of commentary, a lot of reporting over the last 3-4 days with respect to the Justice Department and FBI filing in the case involving the San Bernardino phone and Apple, whether the U.S. government actually exhausted all authorities and all opportunities to exploit that phone before seeking to force Apple to help you do it. Can you describe how you came to understand there were offers of outside help and whether that outside help is bearing any fruit at this time?
Well, what I can tell you is that it's certainly, as we've indicated in our pleadings, as we reviewed this case, the San Bernardino case is a matter where we are trying to exhaust all investigative tools to find all information or evidence that would lead to insights or information about those individuals who perpetrated that deadly terrorist attack in San Bernardino. And in the course of that, we have focused on a number of electronic devices, in particular the phone of Syed Farouk had requested Apple's assistance in that regard, and certainly when they indicated that they would not provide that assistance, went to court to obtain that assistance as well. But as in every case and in every investigation, we did not stop there. Certainly at the time, we did not have any further avenues of assistance or recourse, and we still may not. We do not know if the individuals or third parties who've come forward and offered assistance have in fact offered us a viable method for obtaining what evidence may be on that phone. So we are at this time hopeful that that is the case. It has always been our goal to extract the information that may be on that phone and determine what information or evidence it may give us about this deadly attack. And if we can do that, we will do that. But at this point, it's really too early to say how that's going to work out. We're hopeful, but we don't know how it's going to resolve itself. Jim, did you want to add anything?
I think I should. I like these press conferences where I don't have to talk. So, the only thing I'd add to that is we tried everything we could think of, asked everybody we thought might be able to help inside and outside the government before bringing the litigation in San Bernardino. And we said that in our papers in San Bernardino. The Attorney General and I have said it publicly. I've said it under oath in Congress, so it's true. But what has happened is the attention that's been drawn to this issue by the litigation, by the controversy that surrounded it, has stimulated a marketplace of creative people all around the world to try and come up with ideas. Lots of folks have come to us with potential ideas. It looks like we now have one that may work out. We're optimistic, and we'll see. But the notion that we said it, that we had no alternatives without having tried to exhaust all alternatives is silly. We did everything we could before bringing the litigation. Now people have come from all over the globe with suggestions, and we're going to see whether that works, because the goal was, and always will be to try to investigate a terrorist attack in a competent way.
Just for the director, in terms of on the ISIS front, are you sort of seeing perhaps where ISIS is getting a little bit more organized, better at organizing these kinds of attacks on the heels of what happened in Brussels? Is there some concern that they're just getting better at it, more experienced, better at recruiting people, better at organizing these kinds of attacks?
I don't think I give this group of savages credit for getting better. This is an aspect of the threat that we have long talked about. That is, we worry here in the States about people being radicalized in place, responding to the poison. But as we've talked about for almost 3 years now, we worry very much about people from anywhere on the globe who travel to Syria, to the so-called caliphate, get the worst kind of training, and then flow back out. And that's especially a problem in Europe. And so this is a manifestation of that problem. I don't think it reflects greater skill or organization on ISIL's part.
Who hasn't asked a question, then I'll come back to you.
Director Comey, may I follow up with Director Comey on? Yes, may I follow up with Director Comey on San Bernardino and on ISIS? You said, sir, that you exhausted you tried to exhaust all possible avenues before you started litigation, and there have been a number of cryptography experts who've come forward who said there are ways that possibly could work, including to basically make copies of the chip. You're shaking your head. Did you?
I've heard that a lot. That doesn't work.
It doesn't work. FBI tried it.
I don't want to say beyond that, but we've had lots of people come forward, lots of ideas. We now have one that looks like it may work.
And can you say when that company first approached you?
I think we said in our pleadings, we learned about it this past weekend.
Right.
Yeah, we tried it on Sunday, and it looked like it might work, and so we wanted to alert the court immediately.
And it was not a company you had ever worked with before or you'd ever known of?
I don't want to say anything that might indicate who it is. It's someone who came forward with an idea.
And final question with respect to Brussels. Is there any sense that encrypted communications played a large role in the communications amongst the...
With respect to the Brussels attack, it's simply too early to tell what role encrypted communications may or may not have played. We just don't have that information yet. And again, it will be up to the Belgian authorities as to what they are going to release. Certainly, as a larger issue, we have indicated for some time that we have seen as a terrorist platform those who are involved in terrorist planning, certainly even here in the U.S., start on an open platform and then move to an encrypted platform to continue those discussions. But certainly with respect to specifically Brussels, it's too early to say right now. And I had promised you and then coming back.
Yes, Director Comey and or Attorney General Lynch. Could you, there's been a lot of discussions, especially by the Director, about the disaffected group in the United States who have some sympathy to ISIL. How concerned are you that incidents like this would tip them to move in one direction or another? And looking at the history of incidents overseas that have occurred, what's been the experience of either you learning about possible plans and moving on them before they hit?
I'll start and then turn it over to you, Jim. Certainly, as we've seen here, the threat here in the homeland has been coming most recently from those individuals who are based here, who are inspired by terrorist or jihadist thinking online, ISIL or otherwise. And so that's always a concern of ours, and certainly a concern would be whether or not they would be inspired by similar attacks in Brussels or elsewhere. And we remain vigilant as to that possibility. Jim, you want to add to that?
What I'd add is echo what something the Attorney General said earlier. Anytime there's a terrorist attack overseas, we immediately focus on two things here in the States. First, are there any connections into the United States to the people who committed the attack overseas? And second, is there any risk that any of our subjects in place in the United States will see it as a copycat opportunity? So we're very focused on both of those things. So far, we don't see any indication of that here. And in fact, I'm an optimist, but I actually think that it may have the reverse effect. When people see images of innocent men, women, and children being slaughtered around the world, I hope that will reinforce the notion that the Islamic State, so-called, is not engaged in some heroic, romantic battle on the side of good, but instead they'll see it as a bunch of savages occupying a space that's hell on earth right now. I think we see that reflected in a decrease in the number of cases we're seeing of people trying to travel over to the so-called Islamic State from the United States. That's a positive trend, and we hope very much it reflects an understanding by people looking for a center in their life. This is not the place to find it.
To be clear, though, just to follow up, so you haven't seen any connection between any of the suspects in Brussels so far to anybody in the U.S.?
I think I can say not yet. It's something we're looking at very, very closely, though.
Sure, two questions for Director Comey. On the Apple case, so you've been way out in front on encryption for over a year and a half. In the San Bernardino case, you're trying to get information off the phone of a dead terrorist, and you still find yourself on the defensive, having to write into the Wall Street Journal to defend yourself against accusations of lying. I mean, what is your reaction to that? Are you surprised? Are you disappointed?
I don't feel way out there. I don't feel defensive, honestly. I do feel strongly when someone accuses, especially a major publication, the Department of Justice or the FBI of being dishonest. That's something that can't be let to lie, to sit there. We have to respond to that. But I don't think so. Our goal all along, the Attorney General's, the Deputy Attorney General's, and mine, is to facilitate an adult conversation about a serious conflict between two things we all care about. That's our goal. San Bernardino, we'll say it for the 1,000th time, is about that investigation. And even if this particular technique makes that go away, that litigation, we still have to, as a country, resolve this conflict between these values we care about. And we hope there'll be an adult conversation about this where there won't be any demons, because there aren't in this debate, either in the government or in the private sector.
As part of that conversation, if whatever you're trying actually works, will you share that information with Apple about vulnerabilities or alternative methods that you've found?
I'm not in a position to comment on that now.
This will be the last question.
Thank you. Mr. Carlin, may I ask you a question? What should we conclude from the fact that you've been able to attribute the attack to these 7 people? Are you just more determined now to do it than you were in the past because now you see some point in it? Are you better at it? What does this represent? Just a dedication to do this where in the past you might have thought it was pointless? What's behind this?
I think it's the result of a new approach. And what you saw was back in 2012 at the Department of Justice, we decided that we would take the same approach we've taken against terrorist threats, which is we would make sure that the intelligence community does a fantastic job of collecting is shared with law enforcement and vice versa, and that we unleash prosecutors who are specially trained across the country to work with intel lawyers, FBI agents, and the community in order to see if they can figure out who did it and figure out who did it in a way that we can talk about it publicly. And then third, a determination on our part that once we figure out who did it, do it in a way that we can be public about it, we ensure that there are consequences. And so this is now the last, it's the third case this week alone where we've shown that, unlike what some had said, national security state actors or terrorist groups are not anonymous. We can find them, we can do it publicly, and we will.
Just, it's more a determination to do it than it is developing a new capacity.
These cases are hard, but once you unleash the dedicated prosecutors and give them access to the intelligence, have them working together as teams, determined to disrupt it, they're going to continue to learn new ways to do it, and you see us getting better and better, I think, at figuring out a way to figure out who did it in a way that we can talk about it publicly.
Just following up on Pete's question, would the Iranian nuclear deal negotiations and things like that have any influence on the timing of this indictment? Could you have brought this months ago and you waited? Or did you bring it today because it was just right?
Yeah, I'll take it and maybe turn it over to Preet as well. But our determination, again, is to have our investigators, and this has been the direction of the Attorney General, have our prosecutors and investigators when there's harm against U.S. companies, as there was in this case, when people are stealing from U.S. companies, as there are in other cases, and they break our laws, we're going to do what we normally do, which is find the facts. If we can conclude who did it, we're going to bring charges, and we'll leave it to others to discuss other consequences. So,
Just echoing what John Carlin said, we in our office and throughout the department bring cases when it's right to bring the case. There are a lot of considerations that go into the timing of unsealing an indictment. They go to operational concerns, they go to issues of fact, investigation, and everything else. And so I think anybody who knows the department, and specifically knows me in my office, we bring cases when it's right to bring the case for the needs of the case itself.
Thank you all.
Thank you.